Great. Okay, so I'm a PhD student at the University of Washington, where I work with Jeffrey Heer. Today I'm going to be talking about Idyll, a markup language for authoring and publishing interactive articles on the web. So what I mean when I talk about interactive articles, we can just look at a few examples to kind of see. So first is this essay, Explorable Explanations, which was written by Brett Victor. At first glance, it looks like just your typical blog post. There's just text, maybe some images interspersed, but it actually has this additional interactivity built inside of it. So there's these numbers that the reader can actually scrub and see how a change to the number affects the text. There's these interactive graphics that the user can play with and see how updates to the graphics sort of affect other widgets on the page. Victor published this in 2011, and a lot of these ideas have kind of permeated into other spaces. For example, Distill Pub is a machine learning journal published by Google that really is taking up this concept of trying to use multimedia and kind of interactivity to make concepts easier for people to understand and digest. So here you're seeing kind of a standard technical article that also has kind of these interactive elements embedded in it as well. So the user can directly manipulate parameters on these diagrams, causing computations to be sort of rerun in real time in the browser. And hopefully the reader can sort of gain a more intuitive understanding of what these parameters are actually doing and how they affect computation. This style of article is also popular in news media. So for example, the New York Times publishes a lot of really rich multimedia articles. The Guardian and 538 are also known for publishing this style of article. Here we're looking at something that is explaining why the New York City subway system has so many delays currently, and you can see that there's kind of, again, data visualizations, animations interspersed in the text itself. And this is kind of these are all kind of common design elements that we see a lot in this style of article. Again, here's a fixed graphic that you see kind of update in response to a reader's scroll input. So the graphic on the right advances kind of in response to the reader scrolling through the article. So personally, I think these things are really cool and fun to read, but there's actually some sort of more concrete reasons why we might be interested in making them. For one, there's research to show that they're actually more engaging for readers if they are designed well. They're also, they have the potential to gain a large audience and kind of garner critical acclaim for their authors. So if you're a journalist, these types of things are very important for advancing your career and kind of gaining respect amongst your peers. If you're a researcher, this is important because you want your work to get out there and you want your work to have a big impact. So just one data point on this, Distill has published, I think, 12 articles or so over the past couple of years, and they've had over 2 million visitors, 2 million unique visitors to their site reading these articles. So they're really getting the research out there in a big way. There's also the potential that this kind of interactive presentation is actually more efficient for the readers to learn new concepts. This is kind of more of a hypothetical at this point, but there's some research in the education space that sort of points in this direction, and it's also an area for future work. But generally, it seems like there's a lot of reasons why these are good, and we want to sort of encourage people to use all of the capabilities of the web as a presentation platform rather than just relying on static text. Unfortunately, they're typically really hard to create, and they're expensive because they take a lot of time to create because they're hard. This is kind of mainly due to the fact that they require writing custom JavaScript and HTML to produce. Basically, every one of those examples that I've showed is more or less the authors had to write a custom web page to make that, and so there's not really a whole lot of tooling available that allow people to create a really high production quality interactive articles like this currently. They're also, in addition to being hard to actually implement, they're hard to implement well. So things like the page loading quickly, running at 60 frames a second. There's a lot of user experience issues that you can run into, and a lot of performance issues that you can run into. And especially if you're not a professional web developer, these things are kind of big obstacles to overcome. And finally, it's really hard to work in this code setting with journalists and editors who are really just used to working inside of programs like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. Also, they're used to working in like CMSs like WordPress, for example, too, and interactive articles typically exist completely outside of the CMS ecosystem, so they require some additional infrastructure to set up as well. And so in response to these kind of difficulties that we see, we created Idyll, which is a toolkit for creating data-driven stories and explorable explanations. That's kind of like the non-academic tagline, I guess. There's a few different research contributions here. I'll just go through them quickly and then discuss in more detail. High level, we created a document model for interactive articles. We created a Markdown-based specification language that implements this model. We created a component library that sort of supports a lot of common design tasks based on a corpus of articles in this kind of format. And then we also created a suite of build, runtime, and deployment tools to make it easy for non-expert programmers to kind of incorporate best practices in web development and deployment into their work. So what this looks like in action, just quickly, is on the left you're seeing kind of the extended Markdown, and on the right is an example Idyll article. So the left is just kind of two sections of text here, and the article itself is kind of utilizing this guitar widget that sort of sits alongside the text. The user can actually sort of go in and tune the string on the guitar, and sort of things update in response to that. There's audio, but I didn't want to make you sit through like this bad guitar tuning sound. It sounds like Guitar Center. And one thing to note is the Idyll doesn't create these graphics for you. Like if you want a really custom graphic like this guitar, you're still going to have to use a kind of some other tool to do that. But it really concentrates on making it easy to reactively parameterize kind of any sort of component that you can throw at it. And so what you're seeing on screen now with the guitar and the tuner on the left, these are two different components, but they're using Idyll's reactive runtime to kind of communicate amongst each other. So the document model includes data and state variables that are defined with these tags. The data variables just read from CSV or JSON files. Variable declarations kind of work like you'd expect. You can also embed components that either affect layout or render content to the screen. For example, a table that shows the rows of the CSV file could be displayed with that markup. And there's also kind of some helper functions to make it easy to create these kind of scroll-based presentations. So for example, that onEntered view tag there gets fired every time the component comes into the reader's viewport or comes onto their screen. And that's something that you can just add to any component that you embed in an Idyll article. It's just kind of provided by default for you. And so here's kind of the very hello world example. So we start by declaring a variable x, giving it a value. Then there's some text. There's a title that says hello world. There's text that says the value of x is blank, and then a component that displays the value. And finally a range slider that has its value bound to x. And so when you actually run that, this is what it sort of compiles to. And so you get a range slider that you can manipulate, and the displayed value of x changes automatically. Kind of the important thing to note is that you'll notice there's no code here to actually tell Idyll to update the value of x anywhere. It's just directly bound to the value of the range slider. And anytime that range slider updates, update event is sent that sort of tells any other component on the page that is reading from that value to update as well. So a lot of boilerplate code for kind of creating this style of responsiveness is not needed. Under the hood, what this looks like for components is we expose a function called update props. Any component can access this function and basically push changes back up to its properties. So in this case, the value property of the range slider was set to x, and so whenever the reader changes the range slider by interacting with it, this callback gets called, the update props function gets called, that sends the value back up. And we've kind of abstracted away the fact that X is the thing that's updated. So the range slider only knows about there is a thing bound to my value property here. And this same API is exposed to user-provided components as well. So if you're writing a custom component, for example, that guitar, and you want to sort of affect change somewhere else in the document, this is kind of exactly the tooling that you have available. So there's always some sort of top-level document state, and components can affect that. We include 28 components by default. There's kind of 4 categories: input widgets, which generally map onto HTML inputs; presentational components, which are things like charts, tables, graphs, things that affect the layout. So if you want to put content off to the side, or make it full screen or full width, or make more of a fixed component in the background that other content scrolls over, you can use layout components. And then there's helper components that do sort of standard web development tasks, like adding social metadata or analytics to your page. Here's just an example of kind of combining these basic default components. Here we've wired together a text input to create an equation that gets passed into a chart, and a couple range sliders at the bottom which can control the domain of the chart. And so this whole experience actually was created without using any custom JavaScript. It's just idle markup. This one does use custom JavaScript, but generally what you're seeing is a scroller layout that sort of allows the author to specify these different background panels that come in and out of view as readers get to different sections of the page. One thing that we did with Idyll that is helpful for kind of non-expert programmers is that we kind of abstract away all the really messy details of like JavaScript's build tooling. So if you've ever used Webpack or something like that and fought against it, you don't have to do that using Idyll. And kind of basic JavaScript best practices like minifying your code, doing rendering on the server side so there's not like an initial flash on the page, transpiling code so that it runs in older browsers, etc., is all kind of built into the compiler. It's also a one-liner to just deploy projects to the web. So in like 5 to 10 seconds, you can go from running your site locally on the command line to actually having a live link that you can share. So in evaluating Idyll, there's kind of a few guiding questions that we're concerned with. Is it expressive enough to create the types of rich output like the examples that I showed in the beginning? Is it an improvement actually over just writing raw JavaScript and HTML? And can technical and editorial colleagues kind of collaborate on things together here? So we kind of used a few different ways to evaluate it. One, we went through a kind of long iterative design process to arrive at the design that you're seeing now, which included kind of feedback cycles with 13 experts who kind of guided our designs. So we had a sort of a strong prior that this would be something useful based on kind of the iteration that we did with these experts. We released the project as an open source library about a year ago. Since then, it's garnered over 120,000 page views of the examples and the documentation, and the command line tool has been downloaded over 30,000 times. So it seems like people in the open source world are kind of picking up on it, and they enjoy both using the library and also kind of looking at the examples. We did 2 pilot studies. So we worked with undergraduate computer science students at University of Washington. They used it for a final project for a data visualization class where the assignment was to create a interactive explanation of any algorithm of their choosing in computer science. So 19 groups of 4 students attempted this. They're all non-expert web developers, although they all had some programming experience. And they were all able to successfully use the tool to make articles, and they produced some really high quality output. We also were able to analyze the types of features that they were using in their markup, and we found that they were really heavily utilizing the standard built-in components that we offered. So that sort of indicated that they were probably writing less code than they would have been if they were simply using standard web technologies. Finally, we did a case study with Follow Media, which is a small nonprofit investigative news outlet, where I worked with a journalist on their team sort of to directly create this article that you're seeing. So this is sort of fully skinned to look like their site design, so it didn't feel out of place on their site. It uses kind of custom audio clips that are embedded in the page, along with kind of this scroll-based graphic presentation and some other data visualizations that come later on. This was a really interesting experience because the journalist that I worked with, he had experience using R, but he was kind of otherwise non-technical. And after sort of some initial training, we were able to work together pretty well getting this set up, and they really saw the value in using a tool like Idyll there. This is a case where this was a very small organization who probably wouldn't have had the capabilities otherwise to sort of set up the entire infrastructure that something like this would require. The tool is also being used in the wild by kind of a number of programmers and researchers just for writing on their personal blog. IEEE Viz is happening next week, and there's a workshop there that solicited submissions of kind of explorable explanations of machine learning that accepted Idyll documents as one of the formats. And kind of just recently, this thing happened, which was called the 2018 Explorables Jam, which is an online community of people who are interested in creating explorable explanations. And several of them used Idyll for their submissions, so it was cool to see folks using it out in the wild. I'm going to just skip over this a little bit and go talk about the future. We really see Idyll as a useful tool as an analytics platform because we have the kind of reactive state graph. We can keep track of what features people are using on sites and hopefully use this for future work to kind of better evaluate these types of articles. We also see this as being a very useful target for GUI-based tools or sort of WYSIWYG tools to compile to in the future. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I'll take any questions.
We have time for at least one question.
Hi, Max Markup, Freie Universität Berlin. First of all, thank you for mentioning Brett Victor and immediate feedback. I absolutely love this stuff. And what I wanted to know for me as a programmer, how the interaction works for custom components. That's something, if you want to build custom articles and having the different needs for different articles, how you get from the React level back to the Markdown level.
Yeah, so essentially you have this update props function. So if you're in React and you have a handler, so say there's a click event or something, you can say, based on whenever this click handler fires, I want to update one of my properties. And so that allows you to update a property without knowing anything about what's in the markup, if that makes sense.
But so imagine I have this custom React component that I wrote, and I want to integrate it in an article I wrote in Idyll.
Oh yeah, that'll just work by default. Yeah, that should just work kind of out of the box. Yeah.
Mention it by name and then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.